What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, December 15th, 2017, halfway through the month here, 10 days away from Christmas, for those of you who delayed on your shopping. And we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in the control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And, of course, in hour number 3 today, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us with her unique perspective on the world. So, getting right on into it, the wildfires in California are still out of control. They were claiming to have them 25% contained, but apparently the wind has whipped up again. And they're saying even more areas of California are going to be at risk here. And apparently they have lost a firefighter, a gentleman named Corey Iverson, out of San Diego, was assigned to the fire burning northwest of Los Angeles, which is like the 4th largest in California history. And he was an engineer with the State Fire Engine Strike Team, and he died yesterday. They're not saying exactly how, but I imagine it's probably very, very unpleasant here. All right, let's turn to the domestic political arena, if you will, because the investigators and even some of the media are starting to really come down and take a good look at some of these scandals that they've been trying to distract behind all these other kind of things going on here. So basically, Sean Hannity did a presentation yesterday, and we've linked to it at whatreallyhappened.com, where he basically is out there saying that Robert Mueller and the FBI conspired to cover up the Clinton email matter, and basically Comey is looking at an obstruction of justice charge, and Hannity had guests on his show, Greg Jarrett, not him. He wasn't a guest. But the sum and substance of the program is that Hillary Clinton, James Comey, Huma Abedin should be very worried. And yes, that was by Greg Jarrett. I misread my notes here. So, yeah, in a just and honest system, there would be indictments and prosecutions coming. But again, Hillary Clinton, and Bill Clinton, for that matter, the Bush family, they're fighting to protect their narcocracy because they understand if any of them goes down and makes a deal, it's all going to unravel all the way back to that gun and drug running operation out of Arkansas in the mid-1980s, which was the beginning of the Clintons' rise to untouchable power. So Senator Johnson has sent a letter basically outlining the scope of FBI officials sculpting the Clinton exoneration statement for James Comey. And remember, this was all going down before the investigation was even over with, even before they interviewed Hillary Clinton herself. And they were changing the language to basically make sure they didn't say anything that they felt went over the line on Title 18. They changed grossly negligent to extremely careless, as if that really makes a difference. But extremely careless is not within the language of Title 18. Grossly negligent is. I think the case could be made that being extremely careless and is basically the same thing as grossly negligent. But they did change the wording. So here we had the FBI covering up for Hillary Clinton. And yes, it is obstruction of justice. And some of these people ought to be looking at jail time right now. I mean, this is a serious matter. And the guests that Sean Hannity had on his show, the last question he asked them, is this worse than Watergate? And all of them said, yes. It's much worse than Watergate. It's far more pervasive. It reaches out to more top government officials. Richard Nixon had his little plumber's unit and creep, but he didn't really have that many government officials covering for him. In this case, the Clintons have got pretty much everything inside the swamp is looking out for them. Not because they particularly like the Clintons, but because they know if that narcocracy, if the government-sanctioned drug running comes on out, they're fired. They're going to lose their job. The American people will not sit still knowing that the biggest drug smuggler in the country is the United States government and the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, apparently the snowflakes are already concerned that Robert Mueller might be fired. And at this point, the case is being made. His investigation was clearly biased. It had huge conflicts of interest. The text messages coming out from Peter Strzok are basically saying these people saw it as their mission to save the country from Donald Trump. And so there is a clear case of conflict of interest, and Mueller ought to be let go with his entire team. They haven't really found anything. After all these months and $7 million, they have found zero evidence of Trump-Russia collusion. The only indictments they've handed down are process crimes that could have been run through the Department of Justice without a special counsel, and none of them are connected to the Trump campaign. It's like Mueller bought himself a huge fishing boat, and he's been gone out on the ocean for weeks, and he comes back and he's got a couple of sardines. That's it, to show for all that money and effort. All right, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. So apparently, the far-left group MoveOn.org is planning massive nationwide rapid response rallies that will begin just hours after news breaks of Mueller being fired. So again, they don't get what they want. They're going to go on out and scream and cause a ruckus and try and throw tantrums until they get what they want, which is Hatchet Man Mueller back in his office going after Donald Trump. Now, getting a little bit further into Peter Strzok, and this is an article that came out of the Gateway Pundit, basically talking about how Peter Strzok and probably some of these other people in this investigation, they're suffering from a God complex. And again, Peter Strzok was having an affair with Lisa Page, who was married to somebody else, and they were sending all these texts back and forth about just how much they hated Donald Trump and a lot of other things I can't say on the radio without the FCC coming in and yanking licenses from our affiliates. So they sent so many text messages, it's starting to look like maybe they weren't getting much work done. But then I guess at that level of the government, hardly anybody has to work here. But basically, the idea that really comes across is their belief, their faith, that they are there to save the country from Donald Trump. And in fact, at one point, Lisa sent a text to Peter Strzok saying, "You were meant to be where you are, to do the work you must do." These people are really caught up in their own ego and vanity. But in point of fact, an investigator at the FBI does not have the job of specifically removing a president to save the country. That's way, way, way above their pay grade. Now, other people are coming on forward. U.S. Representative Jim Jordan was on the Lou Dobbs show and basically says there is clearly was a concerted effort within the FBI to help Hillary Clinton win last year's election. So it wasn't Russian meddling in the election. It was the FBI, along, obviously, with the Democratic National Committee to get rid of Bernie Sanders and the Hillary campaign itself. That's where all the meddling came from. Russia had nothing to do with it. And again, it is not the job of the FBI to influence elections. They have gone way, way, way beyond their job description in this one. Now, Judicial Watch has filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit against the FBI for all records about the removal and reassignment of Peter Strzok. Now, remember, he was the former deputy to the Assistant Director for Counterintelligence to the FBI, and he basically got caught lying about some of his contacts. No indictment, but he was taken off the investigation and transferred over to, as I understand it, a human resources job. But Peter Strzok was in the middle of all of this stuff while it was going down. He was the FBI's second in command of counterintelligence and chief of the investigation into Hillary Clinton's illicit email server. And he was one of the people who interviewed Hillary Clinton on July 2nd, 2016, months after Comey had already crafted the letter saying, she's not guilty, we're going to let her go. And apparently in the wake of the discovery of those text messages with his mistress, he was removed from the job. And it was a huge embarrassment because it does reveal that Mueller's investigation and the FBI investigation are not objective and unbiased. They're very biased. Now, FBI Director Christopher Wray, when he was testifying before Congress, tried to explain it away, saying that, well, it's unreasonable to think people don't have political opinions. And he's absolutely correct about that. Okay, but we expect officials involved in official business to maintain a sense of professional detachment. In other words, to leave their politics at home and just go in, look at the facts, and follow the facts through to find out what happened. Not to come on in and use your office, funded by the taxpayer, to undermine the president the American people voted for last year. Now, also coming from Judicial Watch, they released some documents showing that former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and her top aide, Huma Abedin, were allowed to remove electronic and physical records under the claim that these were personal materials and unclassified non-record materials, including files on Clinton's telephone calls and schedules that were not to be made public. In addition, the documents show that Huma Abedin took 5 boxes of physical files, including records marked Muslim engagement documents. Doesn't sound to me like that's personal material. And all of these records about all of these documents and files removed by Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin were obtained through a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit. So basically we have Hillary Clinton, who was deleting emails, had classified information, special access compartmentalized information on her private email server. Oh, and by the way, one of the other edits that was done to James Comey's letter to exonerate Hillary, when they were talking about foreign interests accessing Hillary's private email server, it was originally written that it was likely that this had happened. That word was taken on out. They were really trying to soften this thing and make it look like it was no big deal. And that is not the FBI's job, officially. But we know the FBI engages in cover-ups. They were part of the cover-up of the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster. They were part of the cover-up of TWA 800. They were part of the cover-up of the Oklahoma City bombing. They were part of the cover-up of the assassination of Martin Luther King. Go back and read the history of COINTELPRO in the 1960s, and you'll see what the FBI actually does. Like the CIA, it has gone rogue. It sees itself as knowing what's best for the country over the elected civilian leadership, and they're behaving like it. So getting on back to Judicial Watch, they're basically saying, we already know that the Obama State Department allowed Hillary Clinton to steal and then delete her government emails, which included classified information. And these new records show that was only part of the scandal. There was other stuff that was being removed and destroyed that wasn't supposed to be. These new documents show the Obama State Department had a deal with Hillary Clinton to hide her call logs and schedules, which would be contrary to the Freedom of Information Act and other laws requiring the preservation of all documents generated by officials in their official position. So, now then, yesterday I was talking about how this Russian hacker was claiming that Putin ordered him to break into the DNC server. And I made the comment, it sounded like the guy whose lawyer said the FBI had offered him a bribe to make that allegation. As it turns out, this is a second one. So I guess from the point of view of the FBI, if at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again. So last May, there was this other Russian hacker who claimed U.S. officials offered him cash, citizenship, and an apartment if he would accept responsibility for hacking the DNC server, stealing Clinton's emails, and blaming it on Russia. And he refused. And he was then arrested by the FBI under the lead of former Director James Comey. Nobody knows where he's gone. So now they've got another Russian hacker who's confessing that, yes, he hacked the DNC and stole Hillary Clinton's emails under the direction of Russia's FSB. So, again, they're still trying to push that ridiculous idea of Russia hacking the DNC server, when the technical records prove it wasn't an outside hack, it was somebody actually physically present on the server with a flash drive copying the files off. The outside hack job is another government lie. Now, getting on down to what happened in Alabama, Jim Jones came on out and basically said something along the lines of what I mentioned on a phone call, that all of this smear job on Roy Moore was actually just a cover for the fact that they were going to steal the election. It basically gives them a handy reason to explain why Roy Moore, who had been leading in the polls all this time, right up until the last day before the election itself, why he suddenly lost. And they've got an explanation. Well, he was a child rapist. He was all these other things. And again, all of the allegations against him, none were proven, and many of them were completely discredited, such as Beverly Nelson and that yearbook. So it was a complete farce. And thanks to the Alabama State Supreme Court, the records have been destroyed, so there can't be a recount. The only possible save, and I imagine they're working to prevent this from happening, is that apparently foreign and military ballots can still be accepted up until the 19th of this month. And there may be enough of those to swing the election back to Roy Moore, but I can imagine already that there's a big push. No, you can't change the outcome of the election. The American people have to believe the elections are fair and honest. They have to believe the corporate media is accurately predicting and reporting the winner. No, what we need is to really have an honest, fair, and accurate election system. What we really need is a corporate media that actually does report on what's going on, rather than just spin-doctoring everything for the benefit of the rich and powerful. Now, a lot of people have been looking at some of the decisions handed down by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and wondering just what's going on with these people. They have thrown roadblocks in front of Trump's immigration. They've come out with some really kooky, loony decisions, and now it turns out we may have an explanation for what's going on. Alex Kozinski, the chief judge of the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, apparently was maintaining a publicly accessible website featuring sexually explicit photos and videos, which included a photo of naked women on all fours painted to look like cows. The liberals should be upset about that. And a video of a half-dressed man cavorting, to put it politely, with a sexually aroused farm animal. And this judge admitted to the Los Angeles Times that, yeah, he did, and yes, he shared some of this material with his friends because he thought it was funny, but he didn't realize people could just access his webpage over the Internet. Well, yeah, that's what the Internet does. But, I mean, if this is the kind of people they have as judges on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, that goes a long way to explaining some of the harebrained decisions we've seen them hand down. Now, getting on back to this issue of sexual harassment and all of these members in Congress who are being accused, there's a Congresswoman, Marcy Kaptur of Ohio, said that you need to understand the women who are working in the Capitol building, they're dressing provocatively. They've got cleavage so deep it's practically down to the floor, and it's almost signaling, yes, I'm available. So guys are looking at these women dressed very sexily, and they're getting the wrong signal. And they act on the signal, and then all of a sudden they're being accused of sexual assault. And Kaptur goes on to say that, you know, there's effectively a dress code for men in Congress, ties and suits. And maybe there ought to be a dress code for the women in the Capitol building in order to head off any more of this confusion. We're going to take a break for some commercials here, and when we come on back, we've got a caller waiting on the line. Stay tuned. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Miles in Maine. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. How are you?
Fine.
Hey, I just wanted to know your opinion. What do you think the chances are that the Russians seriously went out on a limb, stacked that Alabama election for Doug Jones.
Nice try. Nice try. No, I don't think it's serious at all. I think all the election fraud that we've actually documented has all been domestic. And again, now we're finding out the FBI was meddling in the elections as well. Somebody meddled in Alabama, and I don't think we have to look too far to find out who. The Democrats are desperate to retake Congress, and we know the Democrats are cheating. We got a ringside seat to some major political shenanigans last year during the Democratic primaries. So let's start with the people. Let's start with the people we know have already committed the crime. It's just like a police investigation. When a crime is committed, the first thing you do is you look at people who've already committed that same crime before.
Yeah, well, we know they even cheat on each other. Just look at Bernie. But the situation is, when do you think Trump will call for this election committee that, he said there needed to be reform and everything, other thing like that, and we haven't heard nothing about it since.
Well, part of that may be that the corporate media is very much in bed with the vote rigging system. That National Tabulation Center Voters News Service, it's not a government office. It's a privately owned company, and it's owned by the major TV networks and 2 major newspapers. So they're actually part of the vote rigging mechanism. So they're not going to report on anything that says our elections are less than honest. Now, at some point, I would like to see this Election Integrity Commission come on out with some recommendations on how to actually fix this, because there are clearly major problems with the way elections are being run in this country. They seem to be set up in a manner to facilitate and then conceal after the fact massive election fraud. That move by the Alabama State Supreme Court, that was the giveaway. When they came on in and stayed the order to preserve all records, that's the moment I knew the election was going to be stolen.
Exactly. And, wouldn't that be sweet if that election, I'm trying to think of the exact name, the services, reporting services for the elections, wouldn't that be sweet if that was all turned over to the alternative media?
Well, I think we need to come up with an election system that's going to work, and I did describe one in an article on my website, and I've actually gotten emails from around the world saying that's the system we adopted when we got rid of the electronic machines. And then once we have the system, we're going to know how the votes are going to be tabulated. Now, in the case of the system I came up with, we're crowdsourcing the tabulation of the election. There's no central counting authority. Because all results are counted and posted right at the polling places, and then the local newspapers will do the local totals, and the state newspapers will do the state totals, and then the national papers will do the national totals, but everybody can follow the vote from their own polling place right up to the top of the results to make sure that it's accurate. So you're basically going to have hundreds of millions of American citizens validating the election.
Well, that sounds good, Michael. I think that would go a long way in trying to straighten a lot of these issues out. I have one last question, though. I always hear you talk about this Jim guy in Vancouver.
Jim Goddard, yes.
Yeah. How do we turn on that show? How do we get to that show? Is there a way to do it?
Basically, it's a pre-record, and he posts the videos on HowStreet.com, and I'll post the videos at WhatReallyHappened.com.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michael. Have a great day.
All right. Same to you. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open. And apparently, former Massachusetts State Senator Brian Joyce, who served 9 terms, was arrested and charged with running his official office as a criminal enterprise. He now faces 113 federal indictments, or 113 count federal indictment. That is some serious corruption going on there. And it gets back to a question I keep asking. Is this the best our system can do? There's something fundamentally wrong with our system when somehow people who are this corrupt and crooked keep getting these offices. And that, I think, right there tells us there needs to be an overhaul of the election system. So we're coming up here on a commercial break, and during the commercial break, I'm going to go ahead and repost my article on how to have a much more honest election system, because what we have right now clearly is set up to allow elections to be rigged by the very powerful. And we saw that all last year. And I think the reason that Hillary Clinton got so upset was after all that work to steal the election, she still didn't get it, because the American people voted in enough numbers for Trump to overcome that stolen election advantage. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We got another caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're going to go right back to the telephones now. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing?
Doing fine.
Burkas, Mike. Burkas. That's what they need in Washington, D.C. for the House and the Senate, and all the lobbyists, and also all their aides. They all need to wear burkas, so nobody's going to know who's who.
Yeah, that might solve some of the problem. But, again, you know, I think the Congresswoman has a point. You know, there's an implied dress code for all the men, suits and ties, which I don't have a problem with. But the women are dressing very provocatively. They're trying to attract attention, maybe get promoted or something. And I used to see the same thing in Hollywood, you know, where the women working on the production, and I'm not talking about the actresses, I'm talking about just women on the production, were always dressing very provocatively, trying to get the attention of the producers and directors. In fact, I'll share you an interesting story. Going back on when I was working on Star Trek, the motion picture, which was the very first feature film based on the Star Trek franchise, there was a young lady who was hired into the front office, and she was very ambitious, and so supposedly as a joke, she came on back to one of the camera rooms, and she did what's called a scene slate. Now, for live action, it's the clapperboard that you see. For animation shots, it's usually just a piece of paper. It's pre-printed, and you fill out the scene number. And she filled out 3 of them, and she taped one across her chest and the other 2 into sort of an improvised loincloth, and just spun slowly in front of the camera. And a week later, she got hired by Paramount Pictures to a really nice job. So this kind of stuff goes on.
And Mike, on Trump being able to do anything, you know, we talked about this before. You said, is this the best system? You know, there is no more system. We're an oligarchy now, so the system is the oligarchy down.
Yes.
And it's their system. It's not a system, you know. It's not fixable either. It's like, because if you see all this stuff coming out every day, how do you fix it? Like, you can't. It's unfixable.
Well, I agree.
Jeff Sessions
I agree. It can't be fixed. It's way beyond redemption. All we can do is wait for it to fall apart the way the Soviet Union did, which was also being run as an oligarchy.
What about Rome? Was that able to be fixed? Nope.
Nope. I mean,
no.
if they could fix it, or if they wanted to fix it, it would have been fixed. When you see a country that is collapsing, whether it's the Soviet Union or ancient Rome or revolutionary France or Romania, it's because they couldn't fix the problems, or they wouldn't fix the problems.
And Mike, I want to talk about real quick the migrants and the refugees in Paris. I mean, look at how decadent they are also. They're urinating in the streets, and everybody accepts it.
No, they don't accept it. There's a big, huge
problem. Well, the government does.
Well, the government does, but the government isn't everyone. And certainly the Parisians themselves are very angry about it. They're threatening a mass hunger strike unless the government actually does something about this mess. And it's already impacting tourism. I mean, France, especially Paris, relies heavily on the tourism revenues, and it's declining. Nobody wants to go there anymore. They're afraid of the violence. They're hearing these stories about feces and urine in the streets and the no-go zones, and they're saying, why should we go there? Let's just go someplace that's reasonably safer. You know, come to Hawaii. We need you.
Those people are never going to have jobs there, Mike. They're going to get put on the welfare rolls to be debt slaves and just recycle. Is this basically like a recycling system, like a Ponzi scheme, right? I mean, they'll get put in debt, and then they'll get, like, they won't be bailed out, the banks will, and it starts all over the cycle again. But how much more of this can people take? I mean, my God, the indigenous population are out of work over in, like, in a lot of countries in Europe and over here.
Yes.
And they still want to bring in more refugees, and they're not working. So, Mike, I think I know the plan, but sometimes I don't know the plan, like what they're up to. Because it's just, maybe they're confused too now. I don't know.
Well, that's closer to the truth here, because you're making a very common mistake of assuming that there is some master plan to all that's going on, or some group that is in charge of the world. No, there isn't. That's what the New World Order people want to happen. But what we're seeing are these very powerful groups and individuals who have their own agendas they're moving forward, and some of them are conflicting with each other. And certainly a good example of that is this New World Order, One World Government thing, and the open borders is actually working against it.
But did you notice one thing, Mike? The Syrian war is pretty much over. Where's all the calls to bring the Syrian people back home? You don't hear from anybody but the Russians, right?
Yes.
And the Syrian government. Like, where's the bringing them back home to fix up their own country now that we destroyed? You don't hear one thing about them going back home.
Well, to be accurate, there have been reports that the Syrians who went to Europe are now starting to head back home. But again, you're not going to see it reported because it's interpreted as a failure of this open borders, blend everybody together agenda that's out there. But yeah, a lot of the Syrians are heading back home now that the war is wound down.
And Mike, they should bring the Chinese in there because they can build a 15-story building in no time at all, and they can rebuild the infrastructure quick and keep Halliburton the hell out of it. Thanks, Mike.
All right, you got it. Thanks an awful lot, and we're going to let you go. And by the way, I've neglected to mention that story about Star Trek. The young lady with the paper slates, she wasn't wearing anything else at all, and that's why she got to get that promotion over to Paramount. So, anyway, getting on back to the news here. David Cameron is out there saying that Donald Trump's criticism of mainstream fake news is dangerous. The real enemy is Russian bots and trolls. They're still pushing this whole thing about Russian bots and Russian trolls, and yet the investigations keep finding almost nothing. 75 cents worth of ads on Facebook that reached a total of 200 people. But Cameron is apparently on board with the blame Russia and protect the corporate media. Got to protect the propagandists. Without the propaganda, the ministry of propaganda, we're all sunk, apparently is what he's thinking. All right. Now, getting on over to the war zones, and there are plenty of them. The Syrian army has tightened the siege on Beit Jin pocket, and it's an operation against the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which was formerly Jabhat al-Nusra, the Syrian branch of al-Qaeda in the province of Idlib. Everybody's changing their names so often, it really sometimes gets very hard to figure out who is fighting who. And apparently sometimes they fight each other. Now, Putin has suggested that the United States is getting ready to sort of recycle the defeated ISIS terrorists. Now, they've been leaving Syria, they're holed up in Iraq, they're not causing any ruckus, and Putin is saying that the U.S. may be hoping these militants could later be used to renew the fight against Syria's President Bashar al-Assad. The U.S. has not given up that agenda. All right, let's take a phone call here. David in Maryland, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I'd like to ask your opinion of something. I really value your analysis. I don't agree with you 100% on everything, but I don't agree with anybody 100%. But I like your analysis of things. What do you think, Mike? People talk about civil war, okay, in this country. What do you think a civil war would look like? I mean, obviously, you're not going to have a bunch of good old boys with their guns out there fighting a military. I mean, you obviously have to have a portion of the military breaking away to have an actual civil war. But I'd like to know, Mike, what's your analysis of that? What do you think that a civil war would look like?
Well, first of all, your assessment is very correct. In the first American Civil War, the states still had much of their authority, and the military in each state was loyal to that state government. There was no national standing army. In fact, it was forbidden for the federal government to have one because of the abuse suffered from the British standing army during colonial times. And that's why when the Confederacy broke away, all of the military living in those states basically went with them. Now, some people did sort of switch sides. I mean, Robert E. Lee was apparently approached at one point to head the U.S. War Department. I'm sorry?
He went to West Point.
He went to West Point, and I think he was offered command of the Union Army, but because he himself was from Virginia, he went back home and fought on the Confederate side here. Now, today, obviously, it's different. The U.S. federal government has a major standing army, and they intentionally position their forces away from their home states so that there's no sense of loyalty or closeness for what's going on. And that's why they move them around a lot. Don't want them forming any attachments or roots. And so a civil war, as you describe it, a bunch of good old boys with muskets going up against the U.S. military would be a very bad idea, and that's why I'm trying to discourage it as much as possible. That being said, I think one could view this, shall we say, fight between propaganda and the truth here on the Internet is a form of civil war, a virtual civil war, which I think has many advantages over the old-fashioned kind because people who are not involved in the conflict can walk around doing their business without fear of catching a stray round.
Do you think that there's a possibility if there's a rift in the government, well, there's an internal civil war going on now, as we know, but do you think that it could get to the point where the government would split and then generals and admirals and military leaders could possibly choose sides? I mean, that's the only scenario I can picture where an actual hot civil war could occur. Other than that, I don't see it happening.
No, I don't see it happening, and I don't want to see it happen. I don't want to see an armed revolution in the streets of America. Again, I'm convinced that the U.S. government is headed for a Soviet Union-style collapse, and we're just going to have to be patient and let it happen, and not give the government any excuse to say, oh my goodness, there's rebellion in the land, declaration of national emergency, suspend the Constitution, we've got martial law, and so forth and so on. At some point, the government may fake something like that to try and end the Constitution, take away our guns. They're scared of us. They're very scared of the American people because we don't believe the lies anymore. And that's why they're so angry with the independent media and the Internet, because we've taken away from them their ability to lie with impunity. And they're lost without it because they've gotten along with lies for so many decades, centuries. They don't know any other way to run a government.
All right, Mike, very good. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And we're going to let you go here. Now, getting on back to the war zones. Apparently, according to an article, according to a new report, nearly a third of all the weapons used by ISIS on the battlefield were manufactured in the European Union. And, of course, we know that another large chunk of those weapons were manufactured in the good old U.S. of A. In fact, it was a rather embarrassment for the U.S. government during one of the earlier efforts to claim that Assad was gassing his own people. Somebody took a picture of the gas canister, and you could read on the label. It was a product that was made in the United States of America. Now, moving over to Iran, as you know, Nikki Haley was up at the United Nations screaming and ranting and foaming at the mouth and calling for a global coalition to counter Iran. And Nikki Haley was out there saying basically Iran is fanning the flames of conflict in the region, which I find rather amazing because the U.S. invaded Afghanistan, the U.S. invaded Iraq, the U.S. invaded Libya, the U.S. proxy Saudi Arabia invaded Yemen, the U.S. invaded Syria But Iran is fanning the flames of conflict? I mean, that's a heck of a whopper. Nikki, if noses really grow when you lie, Nikki Haley's would have, like, speared somebody in the back of that chamber. Now, Ray McGovern is out there, and he's basically saying that Netanyahu is calling all the shots in this push for a war between the United States and Iran. See, Israel wants their regional rivals smashed. They don't want to do it themselves. Their children are too precious, and they hate to spend money. We'll get the Americans to do it. And they've done it before. Israel was a major driving force for the war against Iraq, because Iraq supposedly had weapons of mass destruction, which turned out to be a lie, just as the claim that Assad was gassing his own people turned out to be a lie, just as all the claims prior to the P5+1 that Iran was building nuclear weapons turned out to be a lie. All fabrication. Remember the laptop of death? It was supposedly a laptop stolen from an Iranian nuclear scientist, and it was full of all these diagrams and charts on how to build a bomb. And then real nuclear weapons experts looked at it and said, this is a joke. These are things that got copied off the internet and modified, and none of them would actually work. So Israel is pushing us to a war with Iran, and Nikki Haley's fully on board with that. But she didn't really get the traction at the United Nations that she wanted. She probably expected that just like when Colin Powell was waving his little vial of talcum powder at everybody, that people would get upset and say, oh, my goodness, we've got to do something. But basically, Nikki Haley's got a reaction pretty much on the same level as Netanyahu's drawing of the cartoon bomb. And they picked out all these problems. And, of course, Nikki Haley's big selling point was this supposed wreckage of a missile fired from Yemen into Saudi Arabia, which she claimed had been provided by Iran. And the basis of that claim was there was one part on the rocket that was traceable to Iran. The case is made. It's obviously Iranian. Little bit of a problem. There was another part on that same rocket made in America. So obviously Yemen is buying components to build their rockets from any place they can get them. And the fact that it's got an American part or an Iranian part does not contradict the fact that Yemen designed and built this rocket. But Nikki Haley's out there saying, it's Iran, we've got to go kill them. Okay, Nikki, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the telephones now. Steve Elkins, aloha. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, net neutrality, Mike. I understand it as being kind of the fast lane, slow lane, maybe the real slow lane. It's certainly not the Autobahn like it is in Germany, but my question to you is, recently Soviet Union, Russia has talked about creating another internet, and I think that's a great idea. I'm wondering the question that I have for you is there anything prohibiting the establishment of another internet here in the United States?
Technically, no, but unfortunately, we're starting to see the internet service providers lobbying local governments to shut down or prohibit community internet systems, because some towns have started setting up their own community internet because they want better service at lower cost, and the big corporations are saying, no, you can't do that. You're crunching our profits, and we can't allow that, even though technically the internet itself isn't owned by anybody. It was developed by the Defense Department's Advanced Research Projects Agency at taxpayer expense, but it's nobody's intellectual property. I mean, there's a lot of intellectual property in the various bits of software that are used to run the internet, but it's not like the internet belongs to XYZ. And so, yeah, you can set up an internet, and it's actually very easy to do because the primary functions of the internet are actually very small, and they're very easy to duplicate. I remember when I was working in San Francisco on Day After Tomorrow, I caught wind of a project that was being set up to create a Wi-Fi-based community internet to allow kids who had computers but didn't have internet in their home at the time to have access to the internet for their schoolwork. Of course, that was back when broadband into the home was still very expensive and very poor quality, which we still have here in Hawaii. But yeah, there's no technical reason you can't have multiple internets, and no technical reason they can't talk to each other. But what we're going to see is we know that the internet service providers donated something like $101 million to virtually every member of Congress to basically try and transform the internet into something that they dominate and control and are able to profiteer from. And they're not going to sit still for anybody coming up with an alternative system that is going to cut into their control and profits. So we could easily see, just like they've already banned Kaspersky antivirus software on government computers, they could ban the Russian internet from being available here in the United States of America. And the irony of all of this is, given that we are the nation that invented the internet, right now we have some of the poorest internet connectivity into the consumer home of any industrialized nation. Japan is already gigabit delivered into the consumer home. I'm promised 300, I'm actually getting 60, and we've fallen way, way behind. We have a lot of people on the internet, but the quality of the internet service is rapidly falling behind the rest of the world. Anyway, Stephen,
hey, thank you, Michael. Appreciate
going to have to let you go.
Yeah,
Take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. I was looking at the Fox News feed here, and the breaking news is they're about to release the final version of the tax cut bill. Notice they're doing it late on the day on Friday, so that by Monday it's going to be old news and nobody's going to want to say, that's Friday, you know, we've got new news this week, and stop complaining about the bill. But in a nutshell, it looks like it's another pander to the wealthy individuals, wealthy corporations. And interestingly enough, I was seeing a discussion about the tax bill where somebody asked the representative who was basically there to talk about the nuts and bolts of the tax bill, will there be a tax relief for the middle class? And the guy just hemmed and hawed and said, well, we'll have to see. And no, there won't be. This is another classic case of the rich are going to get richer, you are going to be made poorer, you must make do with less so the money junkies can have more. That's the thinking inside this country. All right, we're going to take another phone call here. Linda in Ohio. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. One of my adult children she's had medical mutual for 5-6 years, and they're partnering with Sensio Health to administer a program where a representative will call to a convenient time for a physician to come to your home and conduct a health evaluation. She never uses the system. You know, it's just one of those stopgate methods in case she really, really needs it. Anyway, the physician will ask you about your health history, medical conditions, and of course they offer you a $50 gift to Amazon or Target. But I warned her, and she is scrupulous about this because she doesn't use the medical system usually. And is this something that's coming on the public now? I mean, collecting this information in your home and...
I hadn't heard about it before. I do know that when you're dealing with doctors these days, they are asking some inappropriate questions like, do you have guns in your home? But apparently this is something that the government has ordered them to do in the belief that people trust their doctors enough to tell the truth. And I think most people concerned about their privacy are probably going to just, you know, lie convincingly and get away with it.
Well, I think she's refusing this person to come to her home anyway, a physician yet, huh?
Yeah, I mean, that's so weird. I mean, when I was a kid, doctors did make house calls. But after the Health Maintenance Organization bill, oh, no, they built these huge little facilities and you went there. I think the only doctors who still make house calls are the ones over in Beverly Hills who graduate medical school specializing in diseases of the rich and famous.
Well, she has refused it. I mean, it's enticing when they offer you a $50 Target card or Amazon.
Yeah, that's weird.
They're raising her insurance.
That's very weird.
And $50 increase in the insurance, of course, now monthly.
Yes.
So I wondered what your insight would be.
Well, this is the first I've heard of that, but it strikes me as very intrusive. Of course, maybe they sent the doctor. I mean, did they give her an opportunity to fill out this information, like online, or fill out a form and send that in?
No, not at all. There's just the first letter.
Well, I don't know what to tell you then on that one. Anyway, Linda, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here.
Thank you for your insight. Okay.
All right, and we're going to get back to doing the news here. So, we're back at the United Nations. Nikki Haley's up there with a piece of the rocket that fired from Yemen to Saudi Arabia, and because it contains an Iranian part, she says Iran provided the missile, ignoring the fact that it also contained a component acquired from a U.S. company. So, but apparently, all the focus was on this Iran bashing, and it was a distraction from what's going on in Yemen at the hands of the United States and Saudi Arabia. And people are calling Nikki Haley on this. Sorry for all the coughing. It's been very windy here, and there's all kinds of dust and stuff in the air. So basically, the long shot. Haley's out there claiming Iran was the supplier of the missile. Not everybody is on board with that idea. In fact, very few people are. Meanwhile, Iran is blasting the U.S. for this fabricated show on the Yemeni missile. And fabrication is something that's happened before. Happened over in Korea when that South Korean military boat was torpedoed, and they claimed it was a North Korean torpedo from a North Korean submarine. And they dragged up a torpedo, and they put it on display with the blueprint of the torpedo used by the North Korean Navy. Big problem, they didn't match. All right, we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Yemen's Ansarullah rejects U.S. claims about Iran's missile aid, basically saying these are missiles that we design and manufacture in our own country. And, of course, Iran has denied supplying the missiles as well. There's no proof. There's no proof. And the fact that Nikki Haley had to get up there and stretch this one Iranian part to make that link tells us there is no real proof that Iran had anything to do with it. Again, it's a repeat of Saddam's nuclear weapons, Assad's sarin gas, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. How many more times are you going to have to be lied to before you understand this government gets us into wars with lies, fraud, and deception? Because they feel it's necessary. I mean, it's not like they could get up there and say, we want to invade this country because they won't sell their oil for the U.S. dollar, and we need to take control of their oil so that our money junkies are going to be happy. Nobody would send their kids to a war described like that. And yet that's exactly what happened. Iraq was all about Saddam's selling Iraq's oil for the euro instead of the dollar. Now, as you know, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation on Wednesday declared East Jerusalem the capital of Palestine, or they recognized East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine. And these are heads of states of nations, which is exactly what Donald Trump is. So it's on a par. If Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem is somehow legitimate in international diplomacy, and it isn't, then so is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Netanyahu's only comment about that was their statement fails to impress us. And then he went on to say, the truth will win in the end, and many countries will certainly recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and also move their embassies. So far, every other nation has turned the idea down flat. Now, China has stepped forward, and they're echoing the call to make East Jerusalem the capital of an independent Palestine. Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu are isolated on this one. They're not getting the rest of the world to go along. That's because Donald Trump is no Harry Truman. The fighting is still going on. Apparently, Israeli soldiers attacked earlier today a nonviolent Palestinian procession near the Al-Azhar refugee camp north of the West Bank city of Bethlehem. And basically, a lot of Palestinians were injured by tear gas inhalation, cuts, and bruises. Now, the Palestinians marched from the refugee camp and headed toward the northern entrance of the city while chanting against the ongoing Israeli occupation and escalation and the illegal recognition by the American president of occupied Jerusalem as the capital of Israel in direct violation of international law and the United Nations. So Israel's reaction to that is violence. We're going to do what we're going to do, and if you complain, we will hurt you. Now, Putin is thinking about what's going on in this country. He's watching very closely. And apparently, during his regular year-end press conference, basically came on out saying that Trump's hands are tied, that he realizes Donald Trump, for all of his good intentions, is basically surrounded by an entrenched system that will not let him change anything, because they're all profiting handsomely off of that system, and they don't want it to go away. Now, North Korea is warning that the United States is taking a dangerous step toward a potentially nuclear war by seeking a naval blockade. This is from the state news agency KCNA. And yes, a naval blockade of a country is an act of war. It certainly was when they did it to Yemen, and it's certainly going to be the same when they do it to North Korea. Lindsey Graham is out there saying there is now a 30% chance Trump will attack North Korea. And Lindsey is out there saying Trump's going to have to use the military option. Time is running out. Okay, Lindsey, here's your rifle. Here's your parachute. Have fun. Now, Japan has frozen the assets of 19 North Korean companies to step up pressure on North Korea to return Japanese citizens that were supposedly abducted in the 1970s and 1980s, and, oh yes, all halt to its nuclear weapon and missile development. Now, the companies have already been sanctioned by the United States. They deal in finance, coal and minerals, transport, including shipping, and the sending of North Korean workers overseas. And a foreign ministry official said the unilateral move shows Japan's commitment to sanctions ahead of a UN Security Council meeting in New York, apparently later today, to discuss the North Korean situation. Meanwhile, the Chinese Navy has begun live fire drills off the Korean peninsula. And basically, China is taking the position this is in response to all of the South Korean, U.S., Japanese drills taking place in the same area, saying that it isn't just the U.S. that can rattle sabers in that part of the world. And, of course, China is criticizing the U.S. for pushing the region towards what could be a nuclear war. And, yes, it is the United States doing the pushing. Now, China has resumed their military buildup in the disputed Doklam Plateau. Remember, a couple of months ago, there was this standoff between China and India over this road that had been built across the border because it was easier than digging a tunnel, and there was a bit of a standoff about that. But apparently, China is continuing to build up their military in that part of the world. Now, we've been talking about the poor quality of U.S.-made weapons, and now it turns out they're not only deficient, they're sneaky. Norway just took delivery of the first 4 of their F-35 fighter jets. And in working with them, learning how to use them, they discovered these jets are sending sensitive data back to the U.S. manufacturer, Lockheed Martin, and presumably the hands of the government as well. And Norway's concerned because some of that information is not something they want Lockheed Martin or the U.S. government to have. And that is something that probably everybody who's purchasing U.S.-made weapons ought to be thinking about. Is this thing spying on me? We know the U.S. government has turned our computers into spies against us, our cell phones into spies against us, our tablets into spies against us. Wouldn't it make sense that they would engineer the weapons to be spies on behalf of the United States, or even worse, be remotely disabled should the people who are acquiring these weapons decide they don't like the United States anymore? But the F-35 got caught red-handed, sending information back to Lockheed Martin, and that was certainly not something the sales representative mentioned was going to happen when Norway closed the deal. Getting into the economic news, Saudi Arabia has launched a $19 billion stimulus package in a desperate bid to kickstart 2018 growth. And a lot of people are saying maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. With oil prices depressed, Saudi Arabia is in a bit of trouble. And apparently this is what Crown Prince bin Salman is doing with all the money that was taken from the Saudi billionaires who were arrested for corruption, and then they were told, we'll let you out if you give us so much of your money. And apparently this is where they're getting the money to pump back into the economy to try and get it going. May sound a little weird, could actually work. Because there's an old saying that money is like manure. You have to spread it evenly over the field to get any benefit out of it. If you let it pile up in a big pile in one corner, it's just going to sit there and stink. And so what bin Salman has done, apparently, is that he got a whole bunch of manure from these billionaires who were hoarding it all for themselves, and he's spreading it across the country. Or if you want another metaphor, I've been talking about the recycling mechanism to keep an economy healthy, where the money that gets concentrated at the top is somehow recycled back down to the bottom for decent wages and salary and investment into necessary sectors of the economy. And that is another way to look at what bin Salman did. He grabbed the money away from the billionaires, and he's putting it back into the bottom of the Saudi economy. Now, of course, the billionaires are going to scream, you're stealing from us, you're robbing us blind, but if you really think about it, how did they become billionaires? I mean, there are some billionaires who have legitimately earned that place by putting out a good product or making a bunch of movies or something, but we know there are people who are out there who just game the system to gain wealth without returning anything substantive to society. So we'll see what happens. He could actually pull this off. World's second largest clothing retailer, H&M, had a major drop on their stock price. It crashed 15%, the biggest intraday drop since September 11th, as the company reported only its third quarterly sales decline in a decade here. Janet Yellen is going on the warpath on Bitcoin, describing it as a full-blown financial stability risk. In other words, if Bitcoin crashes, there'll be no bailout for the people who get hurt because the banks are not exposed to Bitcoin that we know of. The banks aren't accepting Bitcoin, so they're completely isolated. If there's a crash on Bitcoin, there's no FDIC, there's no bailout coming. And of course the Federal Reserve would like to see Bitcoin and all cryptocurrencies go away because they're competition to that Federal Reserve note that must be borrowed at interest to enter circulation. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog. Dollars days as world's most important currency are numbered, warns an expert. The expert is Barry Eichengreen. And he's saying we're heading toward a world in which currencies are going to coexist on an equal footing in international markets. And the U.S. will be forced to share that market with the yuan, the euro, and the ruble. And of course, the Federal Reserve does not want that. They want to go back to the glory days of Bretton Woods, where everybody went through the U.S. Federal Reserve note for all cross-border trade and banking, off of which the U.S. economy made a small fee. Now, over in Europe, they're still pounding on the issue of Brexit. Theresa May was dealt a setback when Parliament amended the Brexit bill to include a final go, no-go vote for Parliament itself, with which they could simply reverse the wishes of the British subjects. But there's another breakthrough because Brussels appears to be ready to greenlight the second stage of the talks and move this forward. So we'll see what's going to happen on that one. Now, apparently, along with Facebook, Britain is trying to find some way to blame the Brexit vote on Russia in order to invalidate it. Same reason they're trying to link Trump to Russia to invalidate his election. And the Facebook came back in embarrassment, 72 cents worth of ads that reached 200 people. And basically, Damian Collins, head of the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee of the House of Commons, was leading the inquiry into the matter and approached Twitter about finding evidence of Russian influence. And Twitter came back, said they'd spent about $1,000, and Collins said it's an inadequate response. In other words, Twitter refuses to lie for him. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go back to the telephones. Al in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. You said something earlier about the benefits of having the U.S. Federal Reserve note as the world's reserve currency, and you said it was small. It's huge. It allows the United States to export inflation, right?
Yes.
That is major. I remember being a kid how cheap prices were when I went over the border. I couldn't believe it. Now it's, you know, it's catching up, right? But that's key. That was the whole key behind the United States prosperity and low inflation and an ever-increasing money supply.
Yeah, that was a big part of it. I mean, the post-war years, the baby boomer years, that was a big part of it, the Bretton Woods deal. The other part of it was the United States came out of World War II as the only nation whose industrial base had not been bombed into rubble. And so as the other nations rebuilt, they had to come to the United States to buy machine tools, ball bearings, and so forth and so on.
Absolutely correct. Actually, Canada was right there too, except, at the time, we had the publicly owned Bank of Canada, and the governments would actually go there for interest-free loans. But, there's been some kind of, I don't know if you want to call it conspiracy or some false information around, the internet and that about Canada having like the second or third largest Navy, in the world after World War II, and, there was no debt. Well, it's true, there was no debt because of what I mentioned with interest-free loans from the Bank of Canada, but we didn't have, like, the second or third largest Navy. They were just, like, small little support ships and all that sort of thing.
Yes.
So, anyway, it was, like, one of the first times I've ever caught you, and, what you said wasn't exactly true. There was a huge benefit for the United States having that U.S. Federal Reserve note as the world's reserve currency.
Well, you're right, but I phrased it that way as kind of an attempt at humor. Yet it was a ripoff, and a lot of other countries came to regret it because the reason they went along with Bretton Woods it was based on two promises. First of all, that the Federal Reserve would not just start printing Federal Reserve notes like crazy in order to loot the rest of the world of agricultural produce and manufactured goods for little more than ink and paper. And the second promise was that in order to declare the U.S. dollar as good as gold, it had to be redeemable in gold at, I think the price back then was $32 per ounce. And because the Federal Reserve answers to no government authority, and that's right from Alan Greenspan himself, the Federal Reserve did start overprinting the U.S. dollars. And that was another reason of that post-war boom. It was just nothing but ink and paper, and these other countries were required by the treaty to treat them as if they were something of value. And then in the late 1970s, France, which had survived a CIA attempt to change their government, decided they were going to send back all the ink and paper notes that had piled up in their bank vaults and exchange them for gold. And Richard Nixon looked in the vaults at Fort Knox, realized they didn't have anywhere near enough gold to redeem those notes, and he ended gold convertibility. And that threatened the dollar, and they propped it back up again with the petrodollar deal, and that is sort of how we got to where we are right now.
Yeah, and that cryptocurrency. Oh, there was a write-up, by the way, on the CBC in Canada about Janet Yellen and the cryptocurrency and all that. And I was almost going to send you a link just so you can kind of shoot through the comments, but people are really waking up now. I mean, it's just snowballed. It's snowballed, Mike. It's a beautiful thing. Good. They're actually discovering, the crapola that's been trying to, the crap that's been pulled over their eyes for all these years. And it's, and it really helps when you have a government website that actually says, yeah, guess what? Chartered banks do create the national currency out of thin air. If you go for a loan, a mortgage, whatever, what they do is they deposit, that money into your account, and then off it goes to somebody else, right? It's just right out of thin air. Beautiful. Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate you taking my call.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And the reason that private central banks are so popular is because when they're first started up, all of a sudden there's a lot of money, and things look really good, and things look prosperous. But as you go along and that accumulated debt continues to increase, you will eventually get to a situation where so much money is owed to that private central bank, they come on in and they basically take everything that was built by the people with that earlier money. And everybody who sets up a private central bank knows it's not going to last forever. They can't. They just want to be on that ground floor when it opens on up because they'll get a lot of money, and politicians get a lot of donations. But in the long run, eventually it reaches a point where the debt is going to collapse the system. And now that it's all linked globally, the entire global private central bank network could come crashing down. All right, we're coming up here on another commercial break, and we're going to take a few moments rest, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we take this next phone call, there's a breaking story coming from The Hill, and it's basically reporting that California lawyer Lisa Bloom was apparently securing money for other women to come forward with accusations that Donald Trump sexually assaulted them. And apparently Bloom's efforts included arranging a liberal donor to pay off one of the accuser's mortgage, offering to sell an alleged victim's story to TV outlets, and even trying to secure a six-figure payment for another woman who eventually decided not to come forward with the supposed accusations. Now, one of the Bloom clients who did receive financial help in exchange for her allegations against Trump was New York City makeup artist Jill Harth, who has defended the revelations while claiming that the money has nothing to do with her coming forward in the first place. And, of course, she's now being represented by Gloria Allred. So it is feeling like, building on the supposed success, smear job against Judge Roy Moore in Alabama, that they're going to go after Donald Trump with this. And they're just going to pile so much on him that people are going to say, well, at least some of it must be true. Oh, horrors, 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 horrors. Now, Matt Damon came out with a comment saying that in some cases of sexual harassment, yeah, bad things happen, and the people who did it should be punished appropriately. But he said there's a continuum, meaning some of the stuff is so minor, it's not really just and fair to destroy somebody's career over it. And it's sort of another way of saying something that I was saying, that one man's flirtation is another woman's sexual harassment. You're never really sure anymore. And apparently the snowflakes have turned on poor Matt Damon, and they're screaming, no, even a finger out of place, the man's career and life ought to be destroyed. All right, let's take some phone calls here. Charlie in Indiana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I was just curious if you were aware of that breaking news story they had last night on Michael Rivera's show, Resurrect the Republic, about the BLM and how they had a hit list and things out.
I've heard that there was a hit list out there, but why don't you give us a few more details?
Well, they interviewed a representative from the state of Washington or Oregon, and I believe it was a state representative, and he, went on to say he was not wanting to commit suicide, and loved his wife, and had no family problems, didn't get into pornography on the internet or nothing like that. So if they ever did anything against him, he would have that, that he didn't do it. But then he turned around and read off a whole lot of stuff about the BLM and the Bundy trial and what happened in Oregon and such, and ended up with basically showing where they had a hit list up for the Bundys and different people that were involved in the Nevada standoff, and that they did have your hot shots sitting up on the thing ready to take anybody out down there in Nevada and all that kind of stuff. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, and unfortunately not all that surprising. We do know there was that one individual that apparently was gunned down by a sniper when the police stopped him on the road, and I'm forgetting the name of the individual, but that definitely came across as a hit.
Well, they had a whistleblower that has talked from the BLM.
Okay.
And he said they had a list of people, like they had pictures of the Hammonds and, the Bundys and them, and had their face on there with a red X on their face, and some people were marked in yellow and others, different colors for the different people, showing who they wanted first, who was the most important, and that kind of stuff, I would imagine.
Okay.
So I just wanted to know if you had heard that, the report last night, and, make sure people understand that this was going on.
Yeah, we have death squads in the United States, and it's an ugly situation. Anyway, Charlie, we're going to let you go. We're coming up on the top of the hour, and the lovely Lady Claire. So let's take another phone call from Sherry in Texas. Aloha, Sherry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. I was listening to what Linda said about getting insurance by a salesman that comes to her home or a nurse or something. Now, I had a friend that her husband got a job selling insurance, and there's something to know when it's just between a salesman and there's no office or doctor or other connection like Blue Cross Blue Shield office or an Aetna office or something, just between you and them. He came, the friend's husband, so I knew him, and came to the house and gave me the sales pitch. Well, I was kind of thinking of getting insurance at that time, so I said, okay, I think I'll do this, because it was really affordable, like just a little over $1,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And the friend's husband got, so he arranged for an RN to come in. Then the RN comes in, and they get like your weight and blood pressure, and they ask about your meds. So far, it's just between you and them. There's no other person here. The trouble with this is I signed up and it was nice and affordable, but after 2 years I heard in the news that they got sued because they were rubber stamping doctors' signatures, and the company started with the word alliance for blank, blank, blank. I don't know if I should mention it, but it's been a good while, almost 30 years. They're probably back. Something similar is probably back now that things have cooled down, but they rubber stamp these signatures and they reject a lot of claims erroneously. So if you were to have a legitimate claim, it's likely that it would get turned down. And this was their MO, to just reject claims and use false means of saying, well, the doctor didn't approve it, when there's no really bona fide doctor. It's all false. So now there is a site on some of our independent media sites. I don't think you have it as a sponsor, but the Power Hour does, and I'll let her look into that. It's a co-op kind of arrangement. You may have heard of it. That really sounds good. I'd love to mention it, but it's not your product. Can I go ahead and mention it?
Yeah, you can go ahead and mention it.
It's libertyoncall.org, and they have this metabid.com where they can check into surgeries to see what a fair cost would be. Also, they have low-cost meds. It's called Good RX, and it's all independent radio listeners, and it kind of, I think it. Well, I'd let them tell her. libertyoncall.org. I'm on Medicare, of course, so
The same for Claire and I.
Anything with that. Yeah, I dropped my B, Mike. So I'm I'm just praying I won't get sick because I'll exit if I do.
Well,
I'll never be able.
Everybody goes sometime.
That's
Anyway,
it.
listen, we're going to let you go. Thank you for the information.
Thank you.
And yeah, you do have to be very careful, especially with the high cost of Obamacare compliant insurance policies. There are a lot of companies out there selling lower cost insurance, but it's not compliant with Obamacare, and there's all kinds of complications. And let's be very honest, in these hard economic times, there is a lot of fraud going on in businesses that are simply desperate to stay in business. And the people who are running these companies, they very easily make these moral compromises. Oh, it's okay to cheat my customers. When times are better, I'll make it up to them. And, of course, the times never get better, and the evils are never corrected. So it's just the way it is. All righty. Now then, getting on back to the news here, back to Europe here. The Swedish authorities are admitting they're having trouble keeping track of jihadi returnees. And apparently, due to a lack of supervision, these former foreign fighters are basically walking around freely and may be contributing to radicalizing others in their already vulnerable environment. So how's that open border thing working out for you there? Now, over in Finland, there is a candidate running for president, Laura Huhtasaari, and she is the candidate of the Eurosceptic Finns party, and she's saying that if she wins, she wants Finland out of the European Union, call it a Fexit. It says the nationalists are going to bounce back, and she wants to tighten immigration rules. So I hope she wins. Meanwhile, over in Chicago, Mayor Rahm Emanuel has unveiled a new ID program that he says is designed to welcome the undocumented community into the city. He's providing a City of Chicago ID for illegal immigrants to use to do whatever it is that they're going to do, like possibly vote. Down in Florida, apparently, after a long fight through the court system, it has now been declared that growing food plants, vegetables, in your own front yard is a criminal offense. And that really is the sign of a dictatorship. I mean, Adolf Hitler didn't walk around telling people they couldn't grow things in the front yard of their own home. But we do it here in the United States of America. Now, Florida says you can grow food crops in your backyard if you want, but they feel that food crops in the front yard, it's unsightly. Not really. There's a lot of food crops that are actually very attractive. What's really going on, of course, is they're trying to keep us all dependent on those large corporate supermarkets. And if people are walking down the street and they're seeing vegetables growing in people's front yards, they're going to say, gee, we ought to do that. We could save a few bucks. And that's why they're trying to crush down this whole idea right now of people growing their own food. They don't want us providing anything that we need. They want everything commoditized and available for a price. But it breaks down when people can't find the jobs to earn the money to buy the food, the water, the medicine, the electricity. And that's what's happening right now. Speaking of Canada, getting on back to that, this is category of political correctness. Canada will not fund student summer jobs unless the employers support abortion. What one has to do with the other, of course, beggars the imagination. But Justin Trudeau's government is saying that any employer will be banned from receiving summer job grants for students if they don't sign an attestation that they agree with not only abortion rights, but transgender rights. I think if I was an employer, I wouldn't bother. Now, here's another story about how this is really getting weird. Apparently, there is a push in schools, primary schools in Great Britain, to have a curriculum that celebrates transgender people. And primary schools are being told they need to stock books and learning resources that celebrate transgender people. This is new government-backed guidelines released by the National Association of Head Teachers. And the document was drawn up specifically to advise schools on how best to make transgender staff, students, and pupils with transgender parents feel positively represented in lesson content and welcomed in the school environment. Whatever happened to reading, writing, and arithmetic? I'll tell you what happened to them. Education has become indoctrination, and above that, it's a racket. We've been talking about all these poor kids who are told, go to college, get a degree, you'll get a high-paying job, you can pay back those student loans. And it didn't work out. The jobs aren't there. Not only that, the degrees they're getting don't really have any value in the real world. And so there was this article over in Zero Hedge about 37 examples of real college courses being offered out there. Okay, Vampires, Evolution of a Sexy Monster, that's at the University of Kentucky. Saints, Witches, and Mad Women, University of Nebraska. Leaning In, Hooking Up, Harvard. Campus Sex in the Digital Age, Washington and Lee University. The Politics of Ugly, the University of Pennsylvania. The F Word and the Public Body, Princeton University. Hip-Hop, Feminism, University of Illinois. Marriage in the Age of Trump, Davidson College. Medieval Sexuality, Northwestern University. Zombies, Modern Myths, Race, and Capitalism, DePaul University. I'm going to skip on down here. Let's see. Rednecks, Queers, and Country Music, University of Michigan. Transnational Sexualities, University of Minnesota. And it just goes on here. Let's see. Rainbow Cowboys and Girls, Gender, Race, Class, and Sexuality in Westerns, Wesley College. Queering the Bible, Swarthmore College. It's amazing here. Deconstructing Masculinities, Bowdoin College. And other things are classes like What if Harry Potter is Real, Appalachian State University. God, Sex, Chocolate, Desire, and Spiritual Faith, UC San Diego. Gaga for Gaga, Sex, Gender, and Identity, University of Virginia. Philosophy and Star Trek, Georgetown. Who invented languages, Klingon and Beyond, the University of Texas. I mean, this is what is being offered in colleges and universities. Nobody's going to get a job with that. They come out with a degree. They've been given a lot of courses that may be fun, hopefully are fun, but they're not worth that money they had to borrow and now have to pay back at interest because the jobs aren't there, and certainly you can't get a job with degrees in those particular areas of study. Education needs to be refocused back on what young people need to be a contributing part of the nation's economy in the future. Science, engineering, math, good language skills, the ability to write and present, the ability to think and reason and analyze. And that's missing from our current college landscape. Now, over in Great Britain, orders have been handed down that traditional depictions of mothers will be banned in commercials. It will now be illegal to show a woman who is feeding her kids at home or ironing clothes or anything like that. They're trying to get rid of harmful gender stereotypes. It's not a stereotype if women want to be stay-at-home mothers and take care of their kids. And you think with all the other problems that Great Britain is going through right now, they've got better things to worry about than gender stereotypes, like the migrant problem, the refugee problem, their economy. We'll be right back. Aloha. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're coming up on the top of the hour, and the lovely Lady Claire. We've got time to take one more phone call. Mateus in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, would you indulge me at a complete topic change and let me weigh in on the quantum mechanics conversations you had last week?
Okay.
Okay, so our theory here is that the Big Bang Theory means that we have no free will for humans. And the reason is because something called causality means that every event in the universe is explained by the event that immediately preceded it. And that goes all the way back to the Big Bang. It's kind of like if you had a pool table with a pool rack, it's been broken by a cue ball, and then in theory, you're going to be able to predict exactly where the final resting place of all the cue balls is going to be just by knowing the physics of the starting conditions. So that includes all the molecules in your brain and your body.
You have to include chaos theory in that, which is why it's not actually possible to do that prediction. Of course, I hold the Big Bang didn't happen, that it's a scientific goof as bad as the Earth-centered solar system and the epicycle.
Yeah, I don't agree with it either. It's just what's being taught in school. I'm just saying what most people are being taught in school, and that as a result of this materialistic perspective on it, that all of our actions could be in theory predicted, and that therefore we don't have free will. But then quantum mechanics came along with the quantum jump, and this is when an electron is in its orbit around nucleus.
I'm familiar with the quantum jump here. I think, well, you know, when Niels
Bohr... Can I just say this is, like, you know, this hasn't been said before. Can you just give me a chance to say this?
All right, go ahead.
Like, okay, when the orbit jumps from one orbit to the next, the miracle and the magic is that it never occupies the space between. It's an instantaneous jump. It's a break in causality. It opens up a completely new model of the universe where spontaneous creation can now exist without being dependent upon causality, which means that we're not predetermined. We do have free will, and so that's just what I wanted to say about causality. You were talking about
going on your argument of causality. What causes the quantum jump is the atom is being heated, or it may be cooling, and the electron is jumping the other way. So you know there's a cause there. But I think you're mixing apples and oranges here, trying to use quantum theory to explain whether or not we have free will. I think most of us presume we have free will. And again, even though the schools are teaching the Big Bang Theory, you and I both know that it's nonsense, which kind of makes this entire discussion rather moot. But again, if you get back to chaos theory...
is what started quantum mechanics.
But if you get back to chaos theory, that explains why, in point of fact, nothing really is predictable in the long run. And so that undermines that whole idea that there is some kind of a link from the beginning of the universe to the end where it could be predicted. No, it really can't. And apparently even Stephen Hawking is agreeing that there is some confusion around the event horizon of a black hole where things can't necessarily be predicted in terms of what's going to happen. Anyway, we've got to take a break here. Thank you for the call. Thank you for the call, Mateus. We're going to take a break here and bring in the lovely Lady Claire. So we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on BAM Music, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire. And she's wrapped up here because it's actually unseasonably cold here in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And I realized belatedly, having lost 100 pounds, I don't have any long blue jeans, which we're going to correct this afternoon.
Yes, we're going to fix that.
Because we're acclimated to the tropical climate, and it's very cold, and there's a lot of wind chill factor. So that's why she's all wrapped up like this here today.
Yes.
Okay, so what's the first thing that you want to talk about today?
Well, we have been talking about the repercussions of President Trump's declaring Jerusalem the capital of Israel.
Yes.
And this thing has not tamped down. The protests are getting worse. And today, a protester in a wheelchair was shot dead by Israeli troops along with 2 other Palestinians. And there were others who were killed. Another 150 were hurt as protests all over President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital enter their second week. Now, I put this up. This was originally from the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail, which is a UK tabloid, has pulled it. And if you take a look at the victim here, you will understand why. The guy who got shot, the image of him, he's lost both of his legs up to above the knee, and he was sitting in his wheelchair making a peace sign. You know, I don't understand this, and you really have to be a butch IDF soldier to assassinate a legless protester in a wheelchair who cannot begin to do you any harm in cold blood.
Well, it's important to remember that all of these demonstrations so far have been peaceful on the part of the Palestinians because they know how Israel will react, and Israel is already reacting that way. Netanyahu is obviously very concerned that he did not get the positive reaction from the rest of the world over this stunt.
Oh, no.
And so the attitude appears to be, we're going to do what we're going to do, and if you complain, we will hurt you.
Yeah.
And that was mirrored in a statement he actually made yesterday, where he said that Palestinians just have a reality check and accept things as they are now, and that is the only hope for peace. And we have been hearing that from Israel all along, where every time Israel grabs another chunk of Palestine, they'll say, this is just the way it is, and if you want to talk peace, you have to accept that.
Yeah, and beside the assassinations of these protesters, this soldier most probably won't be investigated or made to take a leave of absence anytime soon. He or she will probably get a promotion for this assassination. I wouldn't bet against it. I sure as heck wouldn't.
Well, in the eyes of the Israeli government and sadly much of the Israeli people, they hold that the Palestinians are an inferior life form, Untermenschen. That's what the Nazis used to say when they were
Undermen.
When they were putting the Jews and the Gypsies and the mentally retarded and the homosexuals into those slave labor camps. It was because they were less desirable humans, and it was okay to treat them that way. Israel's doing exactly the same thing to the Palestinians.
I would agree. I would agree. We have had an incredible, coming back to the domestic agenda, we have had an incredible bump in homeless people dying on the streets of our cities. Currently, 80 homeless people have died on the streets of Portland last year, adding to the more than 350 who have disappeared while homeless in Portland in the last 6 years. The number marks a 70% increase in homeless deaths in Multnomah County, home to Portland, local authorities said Thursday. And, Mike, this is unacceptable. This is completely unacceptable.
Well, just to backtrack a little bit, it may be that some of those 350 disappeared homeless succeeded in finding some place to live connected with a relative. We have a program here in Hawaii. If you're homeless and you can prove that there is somebody on the mainland who's going to take you in, the state will buy you a one-way plane ticket, economy class, and you can go home. And I think that's a good solution there.
Yeah.
I find it interesting, possibly alarming. They're not saying how these homeless people died.
No.
Obviously, in the coming hard winter, we're going to see a lot of homeless people die if they're not able to get to cold weather shelters.
Yeah.
But how many of them are just randomly being killed by thrill seekers, and the police aren't going to investigate because, after all, they're homeless and nobody really cares about that.
Yeah. This is completely unacceptable to me, and all the state and federal legislators seem to want to do is not to cure the problem, just sweep it under the proverbial rug and run the homeless out of one place and into another.
Well, again, here in Hawaii, that's what they're doing. The entire effort of the government is to make sure the homeless are corralled where the tourists will not see them.
Right.
Underneath the overpasses on the aqueduct, chasing them out of Waikiki, getting them away from the tourist centers, because the tourists will very often give money to the homeless, and that's less money they have to spend at all the stores along Waikiki, and the store owners are very upset about that. So we're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And I find this unacceptable, but I find the idea of such a huge homeless population unacceptable to begin with. And I don't think the U.S. government has a moral right to give a single penny of our tax money to any foreign government when we have Americans sleeping in alleys and eating out of trash cans. And I feel very strongly about that. This government is not taking care of the American people, whether homeless or in their homes. We're not being taken care of. They take all that huge tax money, they spend it on themselves, they spend it on war, they spend it on Israel, and we are left to basically try and fend for ourselves amid all the crumbling infrastructure.
Yeah, and it's just not right. I'd like to revisit that Nikki Haley address at the UN. And Haley said she had what were remnants of an Iranian-made missile system used against the Saudi-led coalition by the Houthi rebels. There's only one problem. Every missile that's being used is of Yemeni origin. None of them originated in Iran.
Nikki Haley's entire case claiming it was made in Iran was there's one part in it that was purchased from an Iranian source.
Yeah.
But also there was another part in that missile that was purchased from an American source. So by Nikki Haley's logic, the United States is supplying Yemen with missiles to shoot at Saudi Arabia. Again, this is a repeat of Saddam's nukes, Assad's sarin gas, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. Pearl Harbor was a surprise. The Lusitania wasn't carrying smuggling weapons to Great Britain. Because that's how this government gets you into war, with lie after lie after lie after lie.
Absolutely. And the Iranian government yesterday has issued a statement denying that a presentation earlier by Nikki Haley represented any proof that they'd been sending arms to the Shiite Houthis in Yemen to resist the U.S.-backed Saudi invasion, saying it was a fabrication. And their foreign minister likened Haley's presentation to Colin Powell's 2003 WMD speech about Iraq, which precipitated the disastrous U.S. invasion and occupation of Iraq.
And that's the one where he was wagging that vial of talcum powder at everybody and saying, it's anthrax, be afraid, it's anthrax.
And, you know, the Iranian foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, is entirely correct in making this analogy. He's right, bang spot on, Mike, as far as I can see.
He is.
Yeah, you know. Here's another one that's a little bit out there, but scary nonetheless. DARPA can exterminate humanity and could feasibly wipe out the entire human race. And it's looking at doing some of the most dangerous experiments that mankind has ever done, and they are looking to develop what is called gene drive technology. Scientists now have the knowledge and the tools they need to create and deliver doomsday genes, which can selectively target and exterminate an entire species. According to Sputnik News, and as previously reported by Hit the Fan, the United States' highly secretive and advanced military research body, DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, announced that it's going to invest tens of millions of dollars into genetic extinction research. And the theory is that it's going to be fighting harmful insects like mosquitoes, which carry malaria. But, Mike, where does this end in the hands of the deep state and the military-industrial complex?
Well, obviously, I don't think DARPA is all that concerned about mosquitoes.
No.
I think they're trying to create targetable biological weapons that will hit people of certain gene types. And obviously, Russia's very concerned because they've caught the U.S. government trying to acquire DNA samples from people all over Russia. Now, obviously, my concern here is looking at how sloppily GMO research has been handled over the years, along with the possibility that whatever infectious vector is carrying this doomsday gene could mutate. Then you could have this thing all of a sudden starts killing unintended targets.
We're talking about also, I'd like to go back to North and South Korea. Seoul has asked the U.S. to delay joint military exercises with Japan until after the Winter Olympics, theoretically to avoid provoking North Korea ahead of the 28 Olympic Games. Mike, do you know when the timing of those games would be? End of January, maybe?
Yeah, it's in January,
Yeah.
and again, along with the upcoming Christmas and New Year's holidays,
Mm-hmm.
ripe target for a false flag.
Yeah.
You've got all those U.S. forces and submarines right there off the Korean Peninsula.
Mm-hmm.
They could fling some kind of a missile into the Olympics and claim it came from North Korea.
Yeah, that could. In fact, there was an article in Zero Hedge that the holiday time can be a false flag time.
Yes, I'm in agreement.
Yeah, yeah. Also, I think you mentioned that China is doing a latest round of military exercises.
Live fire exercises.
Yeah.
And they're basically out there trying to send the message that the U.S., Japanese, South Korean exercises aren't the only ones going on.
Yeah.
And China is not taking an adversarial position, but they're basically trying to say it's not just your part of the world to play around in anymore.
Yeah, I would observe that China seems to be sending the message that although it does not want to see a war on the Korean Peninsula, it's not afraid to have to fight one if an attacking country pushes either North Korea and or China to their limits of non-response.
Yeah.
Now, I thought this was kind of ironic, and I had to laugh a little. This came from Zero Hedge. Russia's former economy minister is sentenced to 8 years in jail. Last November, 1 week after Trump's election, and just as the Russian collusion narrative in the U.S. was getting warmed up, they reported a bizarre incident in the top echelons, one in which Russia's economy minister, Alexei Yuleikayev, was arrested on suspicion of taking a $2 million bribe in return for his ministry's support of a positive assessment that would allow state oil company Rosneft to complete a deal to purchase the government's stake in another Russian oil giant, Bashneft, after he was monitored and his cell phone was bugged by the FSB for more than a year. The bribe in question involved the sale of Rosneft's 50% stake in Bashneft. Now, I thought this was interesting because in Russia, when an official or formal official does something wrong, they get tried, they get convicted, and they get hard time in jail.
Boy, we need some of that
in
here.
In the U.S., when an official or former official does something illegal, they go on book signing tours and are praised and get lionized by a gaggle of adoring fans. Now, Mike, in my world, what is wrong with this picture? Absolutely everything.
Absolutely everything.
Yeah. And there was a very interesting development which has been completely ignored by U.S. and Western media, for the most part. And the title from Zero Hedge is, Who You Gonna Fight? Landmark treaty signed to create an EU army. And EU leaders formally endorsed the harmless-sounding Permanent Structured Cooperation, or PESCO Pact, on Thursday evening in Brussels. After the shock of Brexit, the goal of defense integration was revived by former military foes, Germany and France, supported by Italy and Spain, in a show of unity. A similar proposal was blocked by the French Parliament in the 1950s. Now a treaty has been signed which sees the defense union complete by 2025 in what has been described as one of the most tangible steps in European integration since Brexit. Britain... Yes, go ahead.
Basically, I mean, EU, the Brussels has made it very clear they want to turn the coalition of the European Union member states into a single federalized country under central authority, which is what happened here in the United States, because we started originally as 13 independent sovereign states.
Right.
And that central government, their role was arbiter between the states, and that was basically about it. And now the same thing's happening in Europe.
Yeah. Apparently, Britain, thanks to Brexit, Malta, and Denmark, which has an opt-out on EU defense issues, did not sign the agreement. But the photo accompanying the story has the head of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, who's been calling for an EU army for many years. And he apparently believes that they have to do this because Russia's a threat. Russia's a threat? All the Russian government seems to want to do is have its corporations make money and kind of take care of its people.
Well, again, Russia isn't a threat. Europe is, because as we reported earlier in the week, declassified documents confirm that Western leaders promised Mikhail Gorbachev that NATO would not expand eastward past the German borders.
Right.
And less than 10 years later, they were breaking that, and they're continuing to break it now.
Yeah.
That's what the incursion into Ukraine was all about.
Right. Approaching
and encroaching on Russian territory, and that's why Russia is concerned. But they're not the aggressor here. The West is.
Yeah, I would agree, definitely. I am hoping that Putin continues to have the smarts with which he has impressed a lot of people.
Yes.
And will be 100 chess moves ahead of President Trump and the leadership in Europe.
Well, with Trump, it's only going to have to be 5 moves ahead, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Okay.
This comes to us from Global Research. Again, another blog that I recommend to people. It's very sober in its evaluations. And the title of this article is Growing Signs that the U.S. is Preparing to Wage War on North Korea. Trump Administration Scotches Suggestions of Talks with Pyongyang. And apparently, Rex Tillerson's remarks to the Atlantic Council appeared to be a last-ditch attempt to start talks to try to prevent a conflict that could spiral out of control. And what he said was, it is not realistic to say we're only going to talk, if you come to the table, to give up your nuclear program, he said, contradicting the more aggressive stance taken by Trump. And with a note of desperation, Tillerson continued, we're ready to have the first meeting without preconditions. Well, that got absolutely slammed, both by Sarah Sanders and also by Trump himself. North Korea is well aware that the U.S. demands remain the same, that they've got to scrap its nuclear arsenal and abandon all related nuclear and missile programs. Moreover, such step would involve an ever more intrusive inspection prying into all aspects of its military and security apparatus. And I have to make the comment, Mike, that unfortunately, just because something is the most pig-headedly, ham-fistedly stupid thing the U.S. government could do is utterly no guarantee that they won't do it.
And they certainly have in the past here.
Yeah.
The problem for North Korea is they're looking back at a long history of U.S. interactions with other countries, in which these countries were persuaded to surrender their weapons of mass destruction and long-range missiles on the promise that the United States would leave them alone, only to have the United States invade.
Right.
Libya was, well, we all know what happened in Iraq. Saddam Hussein gave up his chemical weapons. He never had nuclear weapons, and he got invaded. Over in Syria, Assad gave up his chemical weapons for the promise that he would not be invaded. He got invaded. Libya stopped its nuclear weapons program and got invaded. And Iran has signed the P5+1, surrendered their highly enriched uranium, and already we're seeing the machinations for an invasion there. So from North Korea's point of view, it's utter insanity to surrender their weapons of deterrence on the word of the United States government. We have to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And that little piece of bump music is Claire's version of Carol of the Bells, part of her album Christmas Without Borders. There's an ad where you can buy it on our webpage. Plug, 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 plug. Okay, what's your next story?
This comes to us again from Global Research, and it's about the dumbing down of Americans by design. And it goes on to say that the most obvious example of how Americans have been dumbed down is through this nation's failed public education system. At one time not that long ago, America reigned supreme as a leading model for the rest of the world, providing the best quality free public K-12 education system on the planet. But over the last many decades, while much of the rest of the world has been passing us by, it seems that there has been an insidious federal agenda which has been implemented to condition and brainwash a population of mindless robotic citizenry that simply does what it's told. And, of course, the brainwashing commences very early in American schools. Now, I think I've mentioned to our listeners and readers I do marketing for a living. I smile and dial, and it is frightening to me, Michael, to listen to people who may well have a high school education, maybe have a diploma, but appear to have learned nothing from it during the time they were in school.
Well, I'm in agreement with that.
Yeah.
And without naming names, of course,
Mm-hmm.
I'll get mail from the listeners
Mm-hmm.
and readers where the spelling and
Mm-hmm.
grammar and punctuation
Yeah.
is grade school level.
Yeah.
And these are, obviously much older people.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the attitude may be, well, in the age of the computer, all those old fuddy-duddy, old-fashioned rules don't really matter. But, yeah, they do, because that's what makes what you're writing clear and easy to understand without ambiguity.
Mm-hmm. And the way you use language defines you.
Yes,
You know,
indubitably.
I was very lucky to have come from a very ordinary middle-class background, but my parents both stressed the value of language, critical thinking, and education, and those values were something that I knew I had to embrace.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
parents today need to embrace those values also, because it is not just the schools which have the responsibility to teach our young. It's definitely the parents as well.
Well, that's certainly not the attitude of the schools. The schools more and more are encroaching into control of the children, which rightly should be the parents, including medicating kids for ADHD, which is a made-up disease.
Yeah.
And now they're discovering that these medications they're giving the kids for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder are actually impeding their academic performance.
Their ability to learn. My brother and sister-in-law were very smart about how they raised their two girls. There was a lot of focus on homework, accomplishing their tasks, and when my sister-in-law went back for her master's in nursing, all three would gather around the dining room table to study together. And both young women now have very excellent careers and are very accomplished, sweet, whole, self-realized, thinking adults. Emphasis on the thinking.
Emphasis on the thinking. That's something that's definitely not being taught in school today at the K-12 level.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is due to Common Core.
Mm-hmm.
I got to look at some of the Common Core materials through a friend who used to live near us, is not here anymore. And it's almost like they were deliberately teaching kids how to solve math problems in a way that was very cumbersome and obfuscated, as if the real goal was to graduate these kids thinking that they understood how to do math, but not really able to do it. And again, this kind of game playing is not new, because I remember when I was in school, back during the last Great Ice Age, they would teach history as name, place, date, name, place, date, name, place, date. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And you'd walk out of the classroom thinking that you understood history because you had a name and a place and a date to go with it. But history is cause and effect.
Yes.
It's this continuous, intertwined dance of competing interests and agendas. And you don't really understand the history of Columbus until you understand why he undertook the voyage, how he got it funded by Queen Isabella, and how he got cheated originally of his right of discovery after it was all over.
Yeah.
Then you begin to understand what's going on. But our government doesn't want people able to look at history and figure out what's really going on, because that gives them the skills to look at current events and figure out what's going on. And that is something that they definitely do not want young people able to do. They want young people who will get a slogan in their head and a couple of ideas, and they'll just run around and scream those slogans and think that they're politically engaged and they understand what's happening in the world. But they are, as Stalin would have put it, useful idiots.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would like to hope that some of our parents with kids out there, if they haven't considered homeschooling, if it's legal in your state, and that's still a big issue.
It's under attack.
Think about it, because in doing tests years later, these kids come out absolutely on top of most publicly educated kids.
Well, there's no law that says you can't be teaching your kids alongside the school and teach them better things. We got to take another break for commercials, and we're going to go ahead and open the phone lines if you want to call in and say something to the Lady Claire, but keep it clean, and we'll be back after these few words.
Thank you, dear.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and grab your paper and pencil if you have not already done so. If you would like to keep Republic Broadcasting on the air, and I think it would be a good idea, the address to send a donation by check or money order is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. And if you want to call in and subscribe, you'd be a continuing donor, the number is 800-724-2719, extension 03. So that's what you need to do to keep us on the air here. So we've all been good little boys and girls this year.
Yes.
Give us a little something for Christmas,
yes,
or Hanukkah, or Kwanzaa, or
whatever one is celebrating
yes,
at this time of year.
Whatever's politically correct. What is your next story?
The next story comes to us from Global Research again. North Korea has made the statement that President Trump is taking a dangerous step toward nuclear war by seeking a naval blockade. And they are characterizing such a potential blockade against their country, according to the KCNA news agency. Pyongyang also said that it will take merciless self-defense measures against any blockade, as it would consider such a move as an act of war. The North Korean government also believes that any blockade would be a wanton violation of its sovereignty and dignity, citing a foreign ministry spokesman. And I don't know where this came from with Secretary of State Tillerson, but he had mentioned that the U.S. has the so-called right to interdict maritime traffic transporting goods to and from the North, followed by Pyongyang's latest intercontinental ballistic missile test on November 29th.
No, in point of fact, the United States does not have the right to interdict commercial shipping anywhere in international waters. Now, they've been pushing the boundaries on that with this idea that they can stop, board, and inspect commercial vessels suspected of carrying terrorist material, and they may try and use that excuse that North Korea is smuggling in more missile parts or nuclear parts. But technically, under international law, no. If commercial shipping is off limits, unless you're in a state of total war, you don't do that kind of a thing. And the U.S. does not have any kind of a right to interdict commercial shipping in international waters. No country does.
Yeah. And if the U.S. government goes through with it, it appears to me that we have committed, or the government has committed, to a foreign policy here of death and destruction, because this U.S. country, the U.S. military, can do it, which is bound to tick off every country with which we still have, for the most part, relations.
Well, we've lost a lot of those relations just over that Jerusalem announcement. Trump has united the Muslim Arab world against us and Israel. And you'd think they would take a moment and say, maybe we should go back and look at first principles and see whether any of this is working out. But no. We're on to invade Iran, and we're on to attack North Korea. And again, North Korea does appear to have at least some long-range missiles and nuclear weapons. So it will be costly for the United States to do that. And the attitude in Washington, D.C. appears to be, well, we've got our bunkers. We'll be okay. And the rest of you, well...
You're expendable.
There's too many of you anyway. And but yeah, they are risking a nuclear exchange.
And it would be such a completely catastrophically wrong action here. I mean, Mike, the thing we need to think about is we have relations with nuclear-armed countries that we may not really like quite so well in terms of their leadership, and we're not consistently screaming about regime change in those countries, like Pakistan and India. So tell me why North Korea should be different, please?
Well, I imagine the CIA wants control of all that opium growing in the hills of North Korea, and the issue may be that they're basically rolling the dice on a bet that North Korea has not actually achieved a deliverable warhead on a missile. They've tested the components, they've tested the nuclear warheads, they've tested the missile. They're right now betting that North Korea hasn't mated the two together. And that's a very dangerous gamble.
Even President Putin is saying that it is saying that the only way North Korea knows it won't get attacked by the U.S. is to develop weapons as a deterrent to any kind of U.S.-South Korean military strike. And the guy is correct, because if you are looking at the world through the lens of North Korean geopolitics, this is the only thing which makes reasonable, logical sense. But unfortunately, it is U.S. foreign policy through the decades which has made this their only choice of action.
Well, you're absolutely right here, and the whole point of having nuclear weapons or chemical weapons and delivery systems is as a deterrent. And you look at all the nations on Earth that have nuclear weapons, the only one that's ever actually used them against civilians of another country is the United States government. Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, North Korea is looking at all the countries that surrendered their weapons of deterrence, and once that deterrence was gone, they got invaded. And North Korea is not going to go along with that. Yeah. So it's really going to come on down to our government is literally betting your life, your home, your city.
Yes, exactly.
That North Korea has not yet made it a nuclear warhead with a long-range missile.
Yeah, we're building on a busted flush. The people in D.C. have no idea whether they have that technology current and usable or not.
But they're going to take the gamble, because one of the I think it was Lindsey Graham was out there saying, we're out of time. We have to attack them now before they achieve a deliverable nuclear weapon. And so Lindsey Graham is out there. Again, he's willing to risk other people's homes, cities, on this bet that he's right, that they haven't quite gotten there yet. But we don't know, and we really can't know.
You know, I think that the statement about being out of time is also tied in with a coming financial crash, because they do need this war, or a war, to get going, to mask how horrible this is going to be when the economy starts to fall apart.
Oh, yeah, they want something to blame it on, because if the economy implodes, which looks likely to happen, and they don't have somebody to blame it on, the American people are going to point the finger of blame at the bankers, at Wall Street, at Washington, D.C., which is where it justly deserves to go.
Right.
And the U.S. has done this before. Get into a financial mess, get involved in a world war to distract from it and have something to blame all the hardship on. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008. And here we are on the brink.
Yeah, just right on schedule. I would like to bop on over to a study done by the Cato Institute, and it's regarding Iran, and the title of this article is The Risks of Confrontation with Iran, and explains basically 4 options for the United States. New, tighter economic sanctions, challenging Iranian influence in the region, regime change from within, or starting a war. And the Cato conclusion is that America's best policy option would be to further engage with Iran to strengthen its more moderate political factions and weaken its hardliners. America used to be widely popular among young Iranians who want peace and prosperity and not wars and mullahs. The greater threat is Washington's military-industrial complex, which so benefits from the unending wars that it creates to stay alive.
Well, see, there's a problem. The only hardliners in Iran are religious hardliners. Iran is not invading anybody. They have not initiated a war of conquest against another country in 200 years, and certainly not since the Iranian Revolution of 1979. It's the U.S. who is being aggressive here.
Yeah.
And so while the Cato recommendation seems to be the least bloody of all the suggestions, the fact is there may not be a real opposition group in Iran sufficient to harvest for a regime change operation. And don't forget, the Iranians are remembering back in 2009 when the U.S. tried a regime change back then.
Yes.
And there was all kinds of violence and death, a lot of propaganda, and in the end it fell apart when they started showing the flag of the new Iran, and it turned out to be the flag of the Shah.
Right.
And then you had the son of the Shah of Iran making all these statements about how he was ready to resume the peacock throne. And the Iranian people remember what life was like under U.S. puppet rule.
Oh, yeah.
And so the 2009 attempted regime change fell flat on its face. Now, it's only been, 8 years later They have not forgotten that. And that's why I don't think regime change from within is going to be a viable option.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that the U.S. and Saudi Arabia need to remember is that if Iran is attacked from the outside, it is very highly likely that the Russians will jump in to protect it, because they have said so many times. And
as we saw in Syria, the Russians are able to do it.
Yes, they've got weapons that actually work as advertised. From antiwar.com, very interesting, thoughtful article, A Wider World of War. And it talks about President Trump being surrounded by his generals. But there is also a accumulation of a post-9/11 process in which American policymaking has not been made by diplomats, but it's been increasingly militarized. In this context, as the State Department shrinks, don't think that the country has no ambassadors across the planet. America's Special Operation Forces increasingly act as our diplomats globally, training and bolstering allies, and attempting to undermine enemies more or less everywhere.
And the problem is Trump is creating enemies faster than our military can deal with them.
Amen to that. And apparently Donald Trump's first year in office set a record for U.S. Special Ops. Elite commandos deployed to 149 countries in 2017.
Yep, it's a world war.
Yeah, the numbers here, Mike, are jaw-dropping. And in the history of this country, if there was ever a moment when we desperately needed to raise a Department of Peace to capital level to attempt to suggest how to resolve the U.S. government's geopolitical disputes by methods other than war, I think now would be a pretty doggone good time.
Unfortunately, the United States government is putting on the mask and becoming the robber baron of the world because that's the only way they can get out of this economic mess. We've allowed our manufacturing to rot away. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. Nobody wants to let us be their banker with the Federal Reserve note. And so, from the U.S. government's point of view, it's two choices: global war or allow the nation to collapse. And the two, sadly, are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
We get into this world war, I don't think we can win. And that, in turn, would lead to the collapse.
Yes.
Think Germany at the end of World War II. It was really, really ugly.
Very much so. I'd like to go to another area of the Middle East, and that is Yemen. And again, from antiwar.com, a very sober article, How Saudi Air Campaigns Target Yemen's Food Supplies. And this article goes on to talk about fishermen, not doing anything but fishing. All of a sudden they see a helicopter overhead, it bombs them out of the water, almost all died. This is how the Saudis, enabled by the U.S. government, are destroying food in a country that is on the brink of an historic and, horrific famine.
Now, that is a war crime, by the way.
Yeah.
First of all, killing non-combatants.
Yes.
And second of all, imposing starvation is collective punishment.
Yeah, I see that. And these are the kinds of war crimes the U.S. government is enabling in Yemen with the Saudi military and government. I don't know about you. It does not make me proud to be an American right now, knowing that my country is colluding in war crimes. And in the article I wrote on this, I'm asking everyone, all of my brother and sister Americans, no matter what side of the aisle you may think you're on, at what this U.S. military intervention in the Saudi genocide of Yemen, courtesy of the butcher of Yemen, Prince Salman, has accomplished. And I warned everyone on the site, the images are intensely graphic, but very, very real. You have the killings and maimings of children and infants from Saudi bombings. You've got Yemeni children dying of malnutrition due to Saudi-U.S. blocking of the ports. You have got the Saudi troops using depleted uranium and chemical weapons in Yemen. And, they're having about the same effect in Yemen as they did in Fallujah. And now we are seeing this vast spike in severely malformed Yemeni infants who were the victims of DU poisoning in the womb.
That's depleted uranium. But of course, remember, Nikki Haley told us today, it's Iran that's fanning the flames of conflict in the region.
And I'm very much afraid that what a win in this situation means from the perspective of Prince Salman is a complete assassination of every Yemeni person with the audacity to still be breathing. And to that end, he has ordered more intense bombings than ever before, particularly after the death of Salah. And I have an observation that I need to share with you and with our audience. When I was a kid growing up, and I grew up in a very bucolic area, Burbank, California, I never realized that this country routinely participates in war crimes. Now I have to live with that grim reality that this is true every single waking hour. Whether President Trump has had a moment of conscience, which I doubt because he's still chatting up the U.S. selling of bombs to Saudi Arabia as, in essence, being good for American business, or was attempting to soften the optics of announcing that the U.S. is recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital when he requested the Saudis to cease the Yemeni blockade, it appears that that request has fallen on completely deaf ears.
It was all for show.
Yeah,
it was all for show.
Yeah, it was grandstanding. And unless and until there is a political resolution here, unfortunately, Mike, I am afraid that the Yemeni people will be facing more assassinations, more starvation, more disease, more displacement of innocent civilians, and continued Saudi and U.S. military destruction and devastation visited on that country in unimaginable proportions.
Well, the tragedy here is there is no political resolution possible because some years ago the U.S. went on in, kicked out the legitimate government of Yemen, and installed a puppet ruler, like they have done to so many other countries. The people of Yemen don't like living under puppet rule. Nobody does in any country. And they kicked the puppet out, much as the way Iran had done in 1979. So what the U.S. has sent Saudi Arabia into Yemen to do is to bomb them until they agree to accept U.S. foreign puppet rule. And the people of Yemen absolutely reject that.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, final segment of our program on this Pauhana Friday. So do you have another story for us?
Oh, yes, I do. And this one comes to us via Reuters. And desperation on the cusp of madness. And the headline reads, Pence delays Middle East trip in case needed for U.S. tax vote. And the article went on to say that the U.S. Vice President Mike Pence will delay an upcoming Middle East trip by a few days in case a tie-breaking vote is needed from him for tax cut legislation in Congress, a senior White House official said on Thursday. Reuters, this is really a lipstick on a pig moment for you, and the optics of this lame excuse are officially horrible. And the reason I'm saying this is nobody in the Middle East, except perhaps Bibi Netanyahu, wants to receive Pence because of President Trump's announcement last week that he recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The Palestinians and leaders of other Middle Eastern countries now understand that the U.S. can never, ever be considered as an honest broker of peace in the region, will always favor Israel no matter what it does, and collectively has the morals of a dead tree stump.
Well, we're going to get nasty emails now from
dead tree stumps. I know,
okay.
I know.
You've put us into it now.
Yes, I really stepped in it. President Trump threw the Palestinian people under a bus last week, most likely in return for a $100 million, as in million, dollar campaign donation from Sheldon Adelson in 2016. And the Palestinians have every right to be infuriated.
I'm infuriated.
Yeah,
I'm not Palestinian.
Right. Hello. Me too. That fury resulted in the following action on the part of Abbas. Abbas will not meet U.S. Vice President Pence. Official. That the president didn't understand that there would be severe international repercussions and consequences to this act last week, recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, indicates to me one or two things. The man, as you said many times, is really painfully naive about geopolitical issues or is getting some really lousy advice from his president whispers when it comes to thorny geopolitical issues in the Middle East.
Well, like I said, my analysis is that Trump and Netanyahu simply assumed that if the president said, Jerusalem is Israel's capital, the rest of the world would follow along, because back when Israel was carved out of Palestine, President Harry Truman was the first to recognize the new country of Israel, and everybody hopped on board. But Donald Trump is not Harry S. Truman.
Nope.
And it's a mark of how far the United States government has fallen in the eyes of the world that nobody else is on board with this.
Yeah.
Everybody is out there saying we recognize East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine.
Yeah.
Certainly all over the Arab Muslim world. China is now on board saying East Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine. So it's a huge PR disaster for Netanyahu and for Trump.
Yeah.
And again, the same thing with Pence delaying his trip. As far as needing to be the tie-breaking vote, basically whoever is president of the Senate can do that, but the vice president can delegate that.
Yes.
And we have a lot of times where the Senate is being gavelled to order by somebody other than the vice president, and the person sitting in that chair can be the tie-breaking vote. So they're just using that as an excuse. The reality is nobody wants Pence around. Okay, there's the music. Time for us to get on out of here. Please stay tuned to John Stedmiller's program. He's got a lot of interesting stuff to share with you. And we're going to be back on Monday here at Republic Broadcasting. Have yourself a really, really good weekend. Please share what you learn here with everybody that you know. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.